Good morning, everyone. Happy Bastille Day and happy 2-year anniversary of the announcement of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on Iran's nuclear program. In the run-up to today's anniversary, our newly revamped Iran Task Force, which is, as Leo mentioned, co-chaired by Ambassador Eric Elleman and General Charles Wald, released its new report, Strategy to Rebuild U.S. Leverage Against Iran, which will be the focus of our call today. Just very quickly, Ambassador Eric Elleman is a former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and currently a Distinguished Practitioner in Residence at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies here in D.C. General Charles Wald is former Deputy Commander of U.S. European Command and is currently a Distinguished Fellow here with JINSA's Gemunder Center. So for the first question for today's call, seeing as how it is, the 2-year anniversary of the JCPOA first being announced, I'd like to start with a fairly broad question, sort of examine the forest before we go look at individual trees with some more specific questions. So my first question to both of you and Ambassador Elleman, I'll start with you. What do you see as the biggest change or the most salient consequence of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action now that we're 2 years out since the deal was first unveiled?
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you all for joining us today. I think, as the report documents, I think the most salient thing about the JCPOA is that by privileging the nuclear issue among the panoply of issues that we face dealing with Iran that is seeking to exert its mastery over the region, we've basically undercut the ability of the United States to develop a true strategy that cuts across the different elements of national power in order to protect and defend our interests in the region, notably including the interests of our Sunni Gulf Arab allies and of Israel in the face of regional behavior by Iran and continued ballistic missile tests that essentially act as a surrogate for the nuclear program, which hasn't really been ended but merely been deferred for some period of time. Fundamentally, the basis of the agreement, we were told, was to give Iran a greater industrial capacity for enrichment in exchange for more transparency about their program, but as the report documents, we've got less transparency, and the clock is now ticking on the limits that were placed on Iran's enrichment program, and I think the new administration has to face the fact that time is fleeting, and those limits are going to come off sooner than anybody thinks, and leave Iran in a position to very quickly either break out of the constraints or sneak out and sprint to a weapon. So that's how I would respond to your question.
And General Wald, any follow-up comments you have?
No, I think, of course, the ambassador, as usual, put it succinctly. We're going to get into the kind of what do we recommend, but I think just a comment broadly would be the fact is, and I don't think it's any surprise to anybody, but we are in such a complex, multifaceted geopolitical world that we have a tendency to, at sometimes as you go through solutions, you categorize things and kind of compartmentalize them. But I think the issue we have here is that we keep prioritizing the most problematic issue we have in the world, and we sometimes forget to take care of the other ones. And I think what we need to do here is, first of all, continue, as the ambassador just mentioned, highlight the fact that this is a bad agreement. The JCPOA is a bad agreement. There isn't any real easy answer either way, but not doing something is probably the worst thing to do. So I'd go from there.
Thank you. And for my next question, I'd like to pick up on the comment General Wald finished on, which is the Trump administration, as we note in our report, is facing no particularly good or appealing options with dealing with the JCPOA. We state in the report that currently both remaining in the deal or exiting from it is damaging to U.S. national security. We know that the Trump administration is conducting its own review of what to do with Iran policy, including the nuclear deal. So I was hoping that both of you might shed some light on sort of what you see as the administration's options, good or bad, at the moment. They've continued to recertify that Iran is in compliance with the deal while also criticizing the deal and providing some stronger rhetoric against Iranian behavior than we saw from the previous administration. So I'll open the question to both of you, I guess. Ambassador Eldman, you first. What you see as the Trump administration's realistic options for sort of next steps to deal with Iran policy?
Well, I think what we've seen, Jonathan, from the administration is actually confirmation of what we say in the report and what General Walt just said, which is although the deal, I think, from most people's point of view is deficient, both in the restrictions it places on the Iranian program and the issues it leaves unaddressed, like the ballistic missile program, the regional behavior, support for terrorism, et cetera, the options are not attractive. And certainly one of the things that you see in the administration's review is that whenever you develop an arms control agreement like this, you build into it a kind of lobby inside the government from the people who have been involved and who want to defend what they have done over the years. And the argument I'm sure they're deploying is that our allies are very committed to, that is our European allies in particular, the ones who were with us on the sanctions that brought Iran to the table, are very committed to this agreement, and where the administration would just pull out of it willy-nilly, that it would create more problems than it would solve with Iran. And there's some force to that argument. So I think what we've tried to do in the report is lay out, and I hope it feeds into the ongoing review the administration is conducting. We want to feed into this mix some ideas that are captured, I think, in the title of the report. How can we restore some leverage by increasing the pressures on Iran to make them the Gemunder, make them want to come back to the table and negotiate on some of these elements and perhaps allow the administration to frame an approach to negotiations that will be much tougher and more far-reaching and secure an agreement that really does impose meaningful limits on Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon, not just for 8 years or 10 years or 15 years, but in perpetuity.
And General Walt, to build off of what Ambassador Eldman just said, as the report notes, there is a sort of a panoply of ways the United States can begin to rebuild leverage against Iran. And given your many years of direct experience in the Middle East, I was hoping you could, what do you see as some of the ways the United States can start pushing back against Iran effectively in the Middle East against the range of Iranian aggression that we've seen, especially since the deal was announced?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, again, I have to kind of double down on what the ambassador just said. I agree totally. Diplomatically, that's exactly right, and politically. My concern is that doing nothing, because it's really difficult, is going to make this a lot worse in a lot of ways. Number one is that eventually Iran will get a nuclear capability which will change the dynamic totally in the Middle East. Two is they're developing these ballistic missiles that will give them that credible ability to deliver both regionally and then potentially all the way to Europe someday if they ever wanted to. At least the knowledge that you can do that. We've seen what's happened with Korea, North Korea, ever since they launched their latest, what's described as by some an ICBM. That changes the dynamic. And inevitably, Iran will get to that point eventually. And then you really start losing options. And then 3 is the fact that because of this delicacy or this difficulty of diplomacy, I suppose, where we have an agreement, the United States has a tendency to try to follow the letter of laws of international agreements, which that's what responsible nations do. That in following that letter of the law issue, Iran now has kind of been given a free ticket to develop other hegemonic capabilities in the region. And what really bothers me a lot as a U.S. citizen and a former military and person and now associated with this effort is the fact that we kind of semi-turn a blind eye to the fact that Iran is actually sponsoring a lot of the counter military capability against the U.S. and our allied troops in the Middle East, both in northern Iraq and in Syria, and also continues to threaten other allies over there, including Israel and Jordan and the rest of the GCC. So I think it's time for us to, and the ambassador kind of alluded to this, there's a narrative that's developed by people that don't want to have this agreement fail because for a lot of reasons. People have personal reputations invested in it. Some definitely have ideological beliefs and baggage. But the fact of the matter is the debate has been put on the back burner. I'm glad we did this report because I think it's important to have it out for discussion. And 2, I think we need to start holding Iran accountable in some very significant ways. So to your direct point, and we put it in our report, I'm a firm believer, and frankly, we're not going to talk about North Korea, but there's some commonality here with North Korea too. And I think we ought to seriously put in a missile defense capability in the Middle East that the next time or whenever we think it's the time, when the Iranians test a ballistic missile, we attempt to shoot it down, and hopefully successfully. I know there's always those that are worried that if you miss it, it kind of ruins the credibility. I think we can do that. 2 is, I think we need to make sure the Iranians know they're held accountable for, I would say, unprofessional and dangerous behavior by their navies in the North Arabian Gulf. I think our Navy needs to be given the latitude to be a little more strong, I guess I would say, or responsive to what these Iranian threats are. I think we ought to work with the GCC countries, even though there's this difficulty with Qatar going on right now, to work that missile defense broader capability for a reality for the Middle East. And I think we ought to make sure that the Iranians know that we're not going to tolerate them sponsoring military activity against our troops in both Syria and Iraq. So I don't think we need to let them have a free ride. I think the previous administration had a narrative that said if you do anything aggressive militarily, that you're basically treating Iran as a nail and the military as a hammer, and that you're basically not very sophisticated in your approach. I think it's not very sophisticated to disregard the fact that one of the only things Iranians seem to respond to sometimes is a very strong response to some of their shenanigans. So I think we need to go down that path. It's got to be comprehensive. I'm not giving up on diplomatic, and we should have the sanctions regime tightened and continue to increase that. But I think unless you have all the elements of deterrence and avoidance, if you will, we're not going to succeed. So I think this report does that.
Thank you, General Wald. I'd just like to note for our listeners very quickly, if you'd like to ask a question, please press 5* and you will be added to the queue. And we will pivot to audience Q&A very shortly. But I have one more question that I'll address first to Ambassador Edelman and then General Wald if there's anything you'd like to follow up. So having heard about the range of options available to the United States to start rebuilding pressure against Iran, which the report argues was lost as one of the sort of inborn deficiencies of the JCPOA. And we're hearing now reports coming out that the administration is thinking about sort of a shopping list of things they would potentially want on a renegotiated version of the JCPOA. So, Ambassador Edelman, in terms of what you would like to see in a renegotiated agreement, were it ever to come to that, was hoping you could lay out just a sort of a few key issues that are deficient in the JCPOA that would have to be resolved in a new agreement that could be negotiated potentially after the United States rebuilds leverage against Iran.
Well, I think, there are, in my view, really two major issues, and I think I adverted to them, Jonathan, in my earlier comments. One is the question of transparency, and the other is the question of the limitations on Iran, which are actually set to expire after so-called sunset clauses reach the end of their time in 10 and 15 years. So I think first, one of the major questions that was left really unsatisfactorily resolved by JCPOA and needs to be attended to in any renegotiation is the question of Iran's past military activities. In November 2011, the IAEA had a very extensive annex to one of its quarterly reports on Iran's nuclear program that outlined some of the concerns that they had, which were based on intelligence that had been brought to them by 10 different countries, obviously including the United States. The JCPOA basically set up a process that was not really sufficient to address these so-called PMD, past military dimensions of Iran's activity. And that means that there really was never a acceptable baseline established for the transparency measures that the IAEA now has in place to assess the Iranian compliance with the agreement. So I think that needs to be addressed. Second, the question of anytime, anywhere inspections. The Obama administration promised that we would have anytime, anywhere inspections, but in fact, the Iranians have, in some cases, through side deals, been enabled to essentially mail in and report on themselves. They have the ability to delay inspections for a period of time that would enable them to clean up certain activities, and we need to get back to a serious anywhere, anytime regime, much as was done for South Africa when South Africa gave up its nuclear weapons program. Obviously, nuclear weapons, have to do not only with the development of a deliverable warhead, but the means of delivery, and that is a glaring omission. The ballistic missile program of Iran is, not covered by the JCPOA, and it needs to be. As General Wald was suggesting, if you look at what's happening with North Korea and you look at the Iranian testing program and the potential that there is collaboration going on between North Korea and Iran, which we have every reason to suspect, the Iranians are going to perfect their missiles over time. The history of every ballistic missile program since they appeared on the scene in the 1950s is that countries that develop them get better at getting greater accuracy, greater range, and the Iranians are going to be no exception. And then finally, I think we really need to get away from the idea of a sunset on the restrictions on the number of centrifuges for uranium enrichment, and also potentially for the heavy water reactor at Arak, which opens the plutonium path. And none of these things should be subject to a sunset clause where the restrictions end in 10 or 15 years. We need to make sure that there are restrictions that prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon in perpetuity.
Thank you. General Wald, is there anything you'd care to add before we shift to audience Q&A?
No, I think that was exactly the way I feel, too. I think the ambassador articulated it perfect.
Wonderful. So, Leo, I believe we have a couple people lined up for questions.
That's correct. Thank you, Ambassador and General, again. For callers, if you'd like to participate in the Q&A, please press 5*, and you'll join the queue, and I will unmute you when it is your turn. So we'll begin. General Taylor.
Yeah, Larry Taylor, retired Marine Corps. Is there any leverage in exploiting the unrest among the Baluchis in the southeast of Iran and the Kurds in the northwest?
I'll start, Chuck, and I'm happy for you to chime in. So I think as a general proposition in the report, we encourage the administration to think about doing something that the Obama administration essentially forswore, which was being more supportive for the majority of the Iranian people who oppose this theocratic regime. One of the internal problems that Iran faces is dissatisfaction with not just the Kurdish population and the Baluch population, but the Arab population in Khuzestan and the Azeri population in the northwest of the country as well. And I think, I guess my preference would be not for us to so much dabble in that, but I certainly would be willing to encourage some of our local allies to develop some capability that might give the Iranians pause. I do think one needs to be a little careful in pushing this too far because we already have, two countries that are very fragmented in the region, Syria and Iraq, and adding Iran to that mix, sitting on top of some of the capability that Iran has been developing, might be, maybe more trouble than it's worth. But it's certainly something we should try and use as a lever against the government and get them a little nervous about it.
Yeah, this is Chuck Wald, Larry. First of all, I agree with the ambassador. I think we're probably not very sophisticated at helping some dynamic like that. I'm a fan of the Kurds, by the way. I think the internal pressure on the Iranian theocracy is going to have to continue. Mattis is big about that. I think me, traditionally a military guy, not a CIA operative or anything, probably don't have the skill set to try to advise with the Kurds and the Baluchistan folks how to, be stimulated. But I do think some of the things that we've suggested, all of the things, matter of fact, would continue to help those that are against the current theocracy and the regime in Iran to continue to give them hope, I suppose, which isn't a very good strategy, but at least confidence that the regime isn't going to be allowed to just do whatever they want. And there's going to be pressure from the outside on them. I do think we need to be sophisticated enough to try to figure out which groups of people in the Middle East are friendly to us. And I know that I'm personally a fan of the fact that the Kurds seem to know how to fight for themselves and pretty much stand a little more for what we believe in, even though they got PKK issues with Turkey. But I would think our approach from the standpoint of what the ambassador and myself and my team are recommending would help with that internal dissension it's interesting. The IRGC is now having trouble with the leadership in Iran because the IRGC is trying to become more powerful, not just from the standpoint of military, but now economically as well. So, I mean, they're eventually they're going to start to implode. But I would personally avoid giving advice on whether we ought to do external, internal dissent development.
Great, thank you. And we've got some more questions, and for others, once again, 5-star to join the queue. Caller, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Becca Sawyer. My question is Iran in compliance with the deal?
The ambassador can probably answer that better than me, but I would just say from from somebody that cares about this, there doesn't seem to be a lot of penalty for non-compliance, and part of that is we don't have a very transparent protocol to watch what they're doing, and I would just say cynically, the agreement when it was made, there was so much hope for an agreement that there's so many loopholes and there was more intent on trying to get a signature than there was trying to get a transparency and assurance protocol. So I'm not at all satisfied that Iran isn't breaking the rules. As a matter of fact, their history is such that they lie, they cheat, they steal. So I suspect they're breaking the protocol all the time.
So the record here is a little complicated, but bear with me, and I'll try and we covered a lot of this in our report. So the IAEA is doing reports on compliance with the deal, and largely they have found Iran in compliance. In some areas, that's been accomplished because their nibbling around the edges of the agreement has been facilitated by either the IAEA kind of looking the other way at the details and or the United States stepping in to help the Iranians come back into compliance. The example I have in mind is heavy water production. The Iranians produced more heavy water than they were allowed under the agreement, so the United States came in and bought the heavy water from Iran to get them back down under the level that was allowed by the agreement. So, there has been some nibbling around the edges, I would say, and it's harder and harder to really make judgments about this because people who are more expert than I on the technical details, like former IAEA Deputy Director Ali Hainanen and David Albright from the Institute for Science and International Security, have been saying since the deal was done that the revised standards under the deal for reporting on Iran's program that the IAEA has adopted provide outsiders with much less detail from which to be able to make a judgment about exactly how well Iran is behaving under the terms of the agreement and whether there are issues that people need to be concerned about.
Great, and we've got one more question. Caller, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sophie Mervis. Thank you both so much for talking to us today. My question is, there has been some talk in Washington about creating a Sunni Arab coalition in NATO, like organization to counter Iran's advancement in the region, and how feasible would something like that be?
I have an opinion on that, and whether or not it's easy, I don't know, but you got to be careful about comparing it a little bit to NATO, but the general idea of a coalition where the United States is a little more committed than just, there's NATO, there's non-NATO special status by countries, and then there's allies. But I think a more formal defense agreement with the United States, particularly with the GCC countries and Jordan and Egypt, is a good idea to pursue. And we kind of de facto have that a little bit. I mean, the Qatar issue that's going on right now with Saudi Arabia and others in the region kind of complicates that dynamic. But I believe the GCC ought to have more of a defense-oriented agreement, and I think it ought to start with the theater missile defense protocol, that there's shared information, there's shared defense capability, and it's active against Iran, and Iran needs to know that. So I'm a fan of that idea.
Yeah, well, I agree with what General Wald has just laid out. I guess the only things I would add is that the previous administration, because of its desire to get the JCPOA with Iran, alienated a number of our allies in the region. And they, I think, missed an opportunity to build on the fact that both Israel and our Sunni Arab allies have come to see themselves as in a common strategic predicament vis-a-vis Iran. And this opens up enormous opportunities for the U.S. to move beyond a lot of the disputes that have plagued the region for years and develop a completely different strategic footing to base its presence and its involvement in the region on. And I think, to its credit, the Trump administration has tried to repair some of that damage with Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in particular. General Wald mentioned the difficulties that are going on right now, and Secretary Tillerson, I know, is just back from several days of shuttle diplomacy trying to compose the differences among some of our GCC allies and Qatar on one hand, and Qatar allied with Turkey, for that matter, on the other. And while that is a problem, and it definitely needs resolution, and I applaud Secretary Tillerson's taking a leadership role in trying to mediate in all this, I think it's also not an unhealthy thing that this is going on. There have been differences among our GCC allies for a while about how to deal with Iran, about what the appropriate view is to have on the role of the Muslim Brotherhood more broadly in the region and all the political turmoil that it's been in since the so-called Arab Spring began in 2011. And I don't think it's unhealthy to have these divisions made public and be adjudicated, as it were, in a kind of public setting. I mean, I think the challenge is that some of our friends and allies in the region sometimes may not be totally realistic in kind of the diplomatic objectives they set out. And this is where I think the United States role comes in. This is where U.S. leadership, I think, can play a helpful role in getting the parties to define their objectives in ways that will actually obtain of some kind of agreement. And I hope that's what Secretary Tillerson does, because obviously the more unity we have among our allies in the region vis-a-vis Iran, the stronger position we'll be in to manage the Iranian threat.
Thank you both. I think on Leo, unless we have any more last-minute additions to the queue, I think that's a good note to end on. I'd like to thank our Iran Task Force co-chairs, Ambassador Edelman and General Wald, for joining the call today and for leading this effort to produce what we hope is a very timely report as the administration considers its Iran policy. I'm going to turn the phone over to Leo with a few more JINSA-related announcements. Thank you all again for joining today's call.
Yeah, thank you, and let me echo Jonathan's thanks for listening in and for your support of our organization. Just wanted to alert you, we will be having another JINSA conference call on Monday afternoon to discuss our new and revamped Homeland Security program and a nationwide tour of conferences that we're starting to launch next month, and we hope that you can both join the conference call to find out what the conferences will entail, as well as hopefully participate in them too. And finally, for press on this call, if you have any media inquiries, I ask that you contact Ryan Hughes, and his email is ryan@bongenecompany.com. That's BONGENE